I think Cowboys Nation believes that Troy Aikman knows a thing or two about quarterbacking in the NFL, and they should. Well, Troy Aikman recently shared a very strong opinion on Dak Prescott. We'll talk about that. We'll talk about what his opinion is about the challenge that Prescott is facing. Plus, we will discuss the latest NFL news bombshell for the NFC East and what it means for the Cowboys moving forward. I'm talking about a big Fanjo. Ladies and gentlemen, let's get to it. Here we go. What is up, everyone, and welcome into A to Z Sports Dallas Prime Time. I am your host, Mauricio Rodriguez, streaming with you live every Sunday through Thursday night at 8 p.m. Central here on Dallas On Demand Sports Talk Network, with a lot more content coming your way. Make sure that you check out atozsports.com/Dallas. And as always, do me a favor and hit the like button for me if you enjoy the show. Welcome, everyone, on a Wednesday night. It is a great night to talk some Cowboys football. And boy, the Troy Aikman fed us some content. You know, in the offseason, I'm always going to welcome the content when it's free. And Troy Aikman made it free for us because he was recently in an event where Dallas was being recognized as the #1 sports business city by the Sports Business Journal. So they know what they're talking about for sure. And they talked to Troy Aikman. Troy Aikman was in the event. He had a moment with the reporters. And Troy Aikman usually brings it. And the thing that I will say about Troy Aikman is that he isn't gonna try to be correct with his former team. He's gonna give you what he truly believes, whether that's at a public event in Dallas or whether that is in the booth for Fox Sports before, now ESPN. Troy Aikman is not going to sugarcoat things just because he happened to play for America's team. He was naturally, though, asked about the Cowboys because that's Troy Aikman, 3-time Super Bowl champion. Why wouldn't they ask Troy this type of stuff? And specifically, he was asked about the most controversial topic in Cowboys Nation today, and that is Dak Prescott. Now, I say the most controversial because I think even though Cowboys fans might have disagreed with the decision to keep Mike McCarthy or with Dan Quinn or with a whole other stuff, that they are mostly on the same page in all those topics. Not with Dak. They will never agree with Dak. So still, Troy Aikman had an interesting thought or interesting thoughts to share about Dak Prescott. So how about you and I take a listen and then we break it down a little bit. Ladies and gentlemen, here is Troy Aikman.
Well, I do know that we all draw on our past experiences. And when we don't have great experiences, those then become hard to overcome. And I think that's the challenge for Dak, because the question for him and really for the team isn't so much what happens in the regular season now. It's how are they going to play and how is he going to play once you get into the postseason. That makes for a long year when that's the way it works. And I've been there as well as far as when the expectations are that high. But I still believe in Dak. I think that until you do it, there's always those criticisms. And I know Payton Manning went through that his first 3 years. He didn't win a playoff game. And then you look back on it now, you can't imagine that anybody questioned whether or not he could win a playoff game. And, you know, the Cowboys have been through that earlier in their franchise history. So the pressure gets higher, for sure, as they go into this offseason and then next season. But it makes it hard. It makes it hard to come back and put themselves in a position to do it all over again. You know, everybody talks about the proverbial window and how long it's going to stay open. It's hard in this league to keep it open. You know, we just assume that because these key guys will be back, that they'll continue to play at a high level, win 12 games, and put themselves in that position. And it just doesn't always work that way. So hopefully they have more opportunities ahead of them.
So how about that? I still believe in Dak was the headline for Troy Aikman. But how about him comparing Dak Prescott to Peyton Manning? Not directly, before you get it all wrong, right? Because I posted this quote on one of my Facebook pages for my Spanish content page for the Cowboys. And one person was like, How can you compare Dak Prescott to Peyton Manning? And obviously, that's not what Troy Aikman was trying to say, but he was trying to say that, hey, until you do it, people are going to doubt that you can do it. Even though in the NFL and its history, we've seen cases like Manning's, right? Peyton Manning, man, he took a long time to win his first playoff game. It was a long time. Now, I do understand that Prescott is in a different point to than Manning was, right? He's going into the ninth year, excuse me, of his NFL career, and he has still to make the conference championship game, right? Whereas Peyton Manning took until the sixth year in his NFL career to get to the championship game in 2003. But even when he did win the Super Bowl, which happened in year 9 of Peyton Manning's career, uh, he had a terrible game in that postseason run, right? He had a game with a passer rating of 39.6 versus the Baltimore Ravens in a game they lost. They won 15-6. That was his third game with a passer rating under 40 for Peyton Manning. We still remember him as one of the greatest of all time. And that's not what we want Dak Prescott to be, which is an important element of this conversation, right? Because again, people are going to be upset about Dak being compared side to side to Peyton, but we're not even talking about Dak being an all-time great or anything like that. We are more talking about, can he win in the playoffs? Can he do it at a level that he hasn't done it yet? And hey, maybe this fallacy that just because he hasn't done it means that he can't do it, maybe it happens to be false. There's Matthew Stafford, right? Somebody asked me, well, just tell me a quarterback that never won earlier in his career for the first 8 years of his NFL career and then made it to the Super Bowl and won it. And it wasn't like it was hard to think of an example, right? Matthew Stafford just did it in 2021. Did it with a different team, right? He was traded away from the Detroit Lions, landed in LA, and he won it with Sean McVay and company. But then you also look at the guys that have won it and then just never made it back to the Super Bowl. Case in point, Aaron Rodgers. Man, Rodgers is going to go down as one of the greatest and most talented quarterbacks of all time. He's going to have one Super Bowl appearance to show for it, and one that happened over 10 years ago. So at one point, you got to question if we're doing the whole QB evaluation thing right. I don't think it can be about where you're getting to in the playoffs. And people like to say, well, I don't care about the stats. I want a Super Bowl ring and all that. Sure, that's pretty. And that's just talking about the outcome, though. It's not really talking about the process and evaluating the process. I think sometimes people forget that it's been 3 different, or what has it been? It's been 4 different quarterbacks that have won a Super Bowl in the last 9 years. Let me say that again. I'm going to rephrase it. In the last 9 years, 6 Super Bowls have been between Tom Brady and Patrick Mahomes. Tom Brady has won 4 of the Super Bowls in the last 9 years. Patrick Mahomes has 2. And then you had Matthew Stafford winning 1 in 2021. And then you have Peyton Manning winning his second Super Bowl. And he did it in one of the worst years of his NFL career. And he did it before retiring, right? That was his second. And again, we're talking about arguably a top 2 quarterback of all time, or top 3. If we don't want to make it a controversial show, I'm just going to stick with top 3. Aikman might have a point in saying that, hey, just because it hasn't been done before, it can't be done. I will say, though, that what he said about the challenge that Prescott is facing is interesting. And I'm going to play just that little part again for you so you can remember what I'm talking about. Listen to what he says about past experiences and the challenge for Dak Prescott is at the very beginning. I'm going to play it again, and I'm going to stop it right after Troy Aikman says what I'm talking about here.
Well, I do know that we all draw on our past experiences. And when we don't have great experiences, those then become hard to overcome.
That part intrigued me a lot because that is Troy Aikman saying, "Well, you got to build on your experiences," but the thing is, Dak might not have a lot of like great ones, right? And it's also not that every postseason game that Dak Prescott has played since arriving in the NFL has been a disaster. Like Sundays, I'm saying Sunday as if it happened last weekend, as in 2 weeks ago versus the Green Bay Packers. Like, sure, it's been 3 years of struggles in the postseason for Dallas, but it's not like Prescott has never put together a decent playoff game. And this is something that is lost on a lot of people. Just think of that first year for Dak Prescott in the NFL. You had the Cowboys skip the wild card round because they were the number one seed in the NFC, so they had a bye week. So they were playing in the divisional round. People like to remember that as a one and done situation. Doesn't count if you're playing in the divisional round to start things off. He had 3 touchdowns, a 103.2 passer rating, took 2 sacks, had an interception, sure, but that was Dak Prescott going toe to toe with Aaron Rodgers. And that was Dak Prescott finding Dez Bryant for a 40-yard touchdown, by the way. I know the defense didn't get a stop, right? I know it was, the Cook game where Aaron Rodgers is scrambling and finding his man on the sideline, and it's like this nightmare for Cowboys fans, and it should be a nightmare. I'm not saying it isn't, but that was Dak Prescott in year one going at it with Aaron Rodgers. Then 2 years after that, you had a decent game. I'm not going to say it's a great game, but he had a decent showing against Seattle. You won it 24-22, moved on to the divisional round. And even against the Rams, the game that they lost that time was a decent game. Numerically and statistically speaking, it was an even better game than the one that the Cowboys won versus the Seahawks in that same playoff run. Dak Prescott had a 99.2, passer rating on that game versus the Rams. The one that they lost because they couldn't stop anything defensively because the Rams even had the hand signals down for the Cowboys defensive line. And then after that, sure, you fall to San Francisco in a game where you don't do much, and they didn't. Dak Prescott had 5 sacks he took. He also had a pick. That wasn't a great game. Fast forward to 2 years from now, or actually like 1 year from now, calendar-wise, and you had that great game versus the Tampa Bay Bucks, 4 touchdowns. I'll give it to you, though. The Bucks were a team with a losing record, so maybe it's a little bit unfair. Still, division champion who was playing at home. So it wasn't like the easiest of games, and it was against Tom Brady, playoff legend Tom Brady and all that. And the Cowboys just outclassed the Tampa Bay Buccaneers on that one. And then he had the Green Bay game now, and obviously the San Francisco loss after the Tampa game. So all I'm saying is like, hey, maybe we are in this space where we are just super frustrated, and we should be. Prescott had a terrible game and all that, but I'm also not comfortable with the whole idea about saying that, oh, Prescott has never done it, so he will never be able to do it. The reality, and it's a frustrating one, the reality is it still falls to what the front office can do to support Dak. Now, that doesn't mean having an elite supporting cast around Dak Prescott. It means just boosting the roster enough to where it's at a point where there's help for Dak Prescott. And what I mean is, man, you know what? If Dak Prescott balled out against the Packers in the wildcard round of this year, the Cowboys would have still lost because they didn't have a clue as to how to stop Jordan Love. They didn't have a clue as to how to stop Aaron Jones in the second half of the game. They didn't figure out anything. CeeDee Lamb had some drops in that game, right? Jake Ferguson did show up. There's a vertical play with Brandon Cooks where he seems to slow down and doesn't get the deep shot from Dak Prescott. There's a lot that went wrong in that game. There's Mike McCarthy calling predictable plays. And again, not making excuses for Dak Prescott, but it's once again about making the Cowboys better. And does that take being more aggressive in free agency? Probably so. And I understand if you don't want to buy into the whole idea that the Cowboys will go all in 2024 because they haven't earned that trust from you to believe that they will change things up. I'm not going to try to convince you that, hey, they will. This time it will be different because I'm not going to lie to you like that. So, as frustrating as it is, it comes down to the Cowboys being better and building a better team. It's not all about the quarterback. And when Troy Aikman says that he still believes in Dak Prescott, I don't blame him. Second team All Pro. Gonna be the runner-up to Lamar Jackson in MVP voting. Cowboys fans should probably feel great about not having to worry about finding a new QB. As sucky as that sounds, maybe for a large portion of this fan base who is very frustrated at number 4's performance against Green Bay. And I understand, man. It's fair. It's fair. He deserves all of that criticism because of the way that game was played. It wasn't a good ball game for Dak Prescott at all. But can you get a situation where you're not setting him up for third and long? Can you get a situation where you can get the run game going and where you can get a stop defensively? You know, the 49ers, they got the stops versus the Green Bay Packers, right? The offense would not have won that game if it wasn't for some big moments from the defense. Kurt Warner recently put out a tweet, hey, I love this because TC actually mentioned Kurt Warner in an unrelated note. He says, I would love to bring in Kurt Warner as the offensive coordinator, quarterbacks coach. Dude is pretty smart. And while I don't disagree, like I would love to have somebody like that in our corner, I'm not sure Kurt would be interested in that life personally. But how about Kurt Warner, man? He had a tweet. It was about Josh Allen, but it also fits the Dak Prescott conversation, and I will read it to you right now. Kurt Warner said, I've been thinking a lot about this whole Josh Allen debate, and I know winning means something, but so does context. Here's a little. I played in 3 Super Bowls, in each of them after the last significant drive we had on offense. I left the field with a lead or tie, right? So 3 Super Bowls, each of them, he has a lead or a tie after the last drive they had on offense. And he has a Super Bowl record of 1-2. And he says, and he argues, imagine me not having to throw another pass in any of those games and being undefeated. 2-0-1. Obviously, because he would have tied another, right? Obviously would have played overtime and could have been 3-0. How would my career be viewed differently without doing anything different? Context matters, although very seldom really considered. But it can't always be just as easy as he wasn't good enough to win. Josh Allen has been great in the playoffs, many times not needing to do anything else to win or tie in those games. And often it's been to best quarterback of the era as well, talking about Patrick Mahomes in that part. Yet many want to say he hasn't been good enough. Maybe, maybe not, but the context matters. I love Josh Allen, man, but I also think a lot of that applies to Dak Prescott. Man, say that Aaron Rodgers does not get that touchdown in his rookie year. Dak Prescott makes the NFC Championship game in his rookie year. And this conversation is a totally different one. But we're so obsessed with quarterbacks that everything, all or nothing, is all about the signal caller. It's not. It simply is not. So I think Troy's words actually helped put the whole Dak Prescott thing in perspective. In my opinion, I do think Prescott has an interesting challenge ahead to where what exactly is are things gonna look like next year? Are we gonna get excited in October, in November, in December? Because Troy also said, you know what? It's no guarantee that just because you have some key guys coming back that you're gonna be back again for a 4th consecutive year where you win 12 games and make the postseason, right? We might be upset even in that sense next year, right? Because it's hard in this league to stay that involved on the playoffs. So we'll see how it all goes next year. But it's a big challenge, as Troy Aikman says. It's going to be a long year for a Dallas team that it won't matter. It won't matter what they do in the regular season. If they go 14-0, like to start the season, we're going to be a little bit excited at 14-0. We're going to enjoy it if we're being honest, right? If we can position ourselves in that moment of time, right? But they're not going to be 14-0. So if they do win 12 games again, though, we're going to be excited, but we're also going to be ready. That's going to be the conversation. It already was a conversation in 2023, but now it's going to be exponentially so, where we're going to be like, none of this matters. They got to show up in the postseason. Troy Aikman also made some comments, by the way, about everything that surrounds Dallas football, talking about like the show business of the Dallas Cowboys. And he made an interesting comment about like how the coach needs to basically account for all that. How teams that make Super Bowls and all that are teams that have an edge, players that have an edge, and how sometimes that is hard to have in a scenario such as Dallas, which I think was also a very insightful comment to make. And part of those things that we can talk about and we can discuss, but I'm not exactly sure what the solution is to any of that. With all this being said, let me read some of your comments here in the chat. Gregory says, Mo, we should get Leslie Frazier to replace Dan Quinn as defensive coordinator. Oh, that would be interesting. I'm still not sure what the circumstances were for Leslie Frazier leaving Buffalo so suddenly last year, and Sean McDermott basically taking over as the de facto defensive coordinator. I'm not sure I would mind Leslie Frazier, honestly, but I also would like to know a little bit more about him before I go in depth into that whole discussion. But Cowboys, man, if Dan Quinn does leave, an outside hire could be positive for this team. But there are also some guys that they could obviously promote, but we will see how things go down with Dan Quinn first. Bruce says, I would take Wink Martindale for defensive coordinator. We talked a little bit about that with Joseph Hoyt when he was on earlier in the week. Martindale, I would be excited about. We're going to talk about Dan Quinn, by the way, tomorrow night. We're going to talk about a lesson that he could learn from Nick Saban. So make sure you're around for that tomorrow night here on Primetime. Double R says, be great at 14-0 and losing the playoffs again. Good grief. How much can us fans take? I'll tell you that. An effing lot. Solution, who knows, is Double R. Yeah, man. That's exactly fair. Let's see, ladies and gentlemen. Shout out to all of you, by the way. I just realized I didn't say hi. TC says, sorry, Mo, we are in the chat having an ultimate fantasy coach chat, LOL. Hey, man, I don't blame you. Those chats are always fun. Mike Solari needs to be on a Greyhound right now, to be honest, is Bruce. Oh, man, people are also talking about an offensive line coach. I want an aggressive DC, says TC915. Lots of blitzing. Don't just rely on the defensive line talent rushing for. Bruce says, Mo, I think Aikman knows what he's talking about when it comes to quarterbacks, but the fans will have to see it to believe it. That's exactly right, man. That is exactly right. I do think it's funny when people are like, oh, man, Troy Aikman, what is he talking about, right? Like, at the very least, you got to say, all right, agree to disagree, I guess. I respect Aikman's opinion. That's the least you can do when you don't agree with Troy Aikman, right? You got to be like, hey, you know what? Maybe I'm seeing things wrong, but I still believe what I believe. That's fair. But I'm laughing at people who are like, what is he talking about? Because Aikman is involved too. He's not a retired quarterback that's just fishing in a lake and golfing. He is involved in the game, talking to people in the game, calling all of these games every single week. So he does know what he's talking about when he discusses quarterbacks. I do agree with that. Anyways, ladies and gentlemen, let's keep it moving here on the show. And let's get into a bombshell bit of NFL news that dropped today that I was not expecting. And I don't think a lot of people were expecting it. When the notification hit my phone and I read, Big Fanjo is out as Miami Dolphins defensive coordinator, my immediate reaction was, heck yeah. If Quinn is out of Dallas, sign me up for Big Fanjo. Boy, I love me some Big Fanjo. Well, the follow-up tweet was not great to read. Because a follow-up tweet, and this was from Adam Schefter over at ESPN, said that that Big Fanjo was probably headed to the Philadelphia Eagles. So that was quite the roller coaster for me right there, very quickly. Right? It was like, oh, hell yeah, get us Big Fanjo in Dallas, only to hear he's going to go to Philly. That was not a great, up and down type of thing. That one hurt a little bit. So for those of you who have not caught up with the news, Big Fangio is out as Miami Dolphins defensive coordinator because, quote unquote, because he wants to be closer to his family in Pennsylvania. That's not entirely true. And now I'm going to get into that in a little bit here. But Big Fangio available, goes to Philly apparently. That's not official yet, but the sources in the reports and everything, they are all pointing towards Big Fangio ended up in Philly. I know there's been multiple reports saying that is the expectation, that Philly expects him to be their next defensive coordinator. And I'm just going to say, man, that is a major piece of news for Cowboys-Eagles for several reasons. The most important one is that the Eagles are replacing the whole defensive coordinator chaos that they had in 2023, where they had Sean Desai and then Nick Sirianni benched Desai and had Matt Patricia take over the defense mid-season, said that he wasn't the defensive coordinator, that he was just calling plays. That's basically replacing your defensive coordinator mid-season. And they just didn't solve the whole problem that they had on a defense that was supposed to be very talented, and it ended up being one of the worst units in the entire league, especially against the pass. They didn't have an answer for the pass, even though they had respectable names at cornerback, respectable names at safety. They upgraded with the trade for Kevin Byard before the season. They did all that, and they still underwhelmed when the season started. 1 year removed from being one of the best defenses in the league. So there was obviously some coaching problems with it. The Eagles try to play a form of defense that involves a lot of communication, a lot of discipline, a lot of chemistry and being on the same page. You got to teach that type of stuff right. And I think Big Fangio can do it. I think that Big Fangio has proven to us that he can be a good defensive coach, so much so that his philosophy really took over the entire NFL. That style of having two high safeties and showing a post-snap rotation and not giving the quarterback a lot of information to work with before the snap. That's all Big Fangio, and that's all taking over the league right now. I think a lot of, every single defense in the NFL has some Fangio-esque pages in their playbook. So with all that in mind, him going to Philly matters. Him going to Philly is something that will boost the Eagles' chances of winning the NFC East, in my opinion, next year. Not saying they will. Not getting into all those predictions just yet. We're going to take it easy here on primetime on that end. But I am saying I expect the Eagles' defense to be better just because of this. I expect the Eagles to automatically be better because it's not just Big Fangio. It's going from Sean Desai / Matt Patricia to Big Fangio. To me, that's a big jump for Philly. And I have criticized a lot of what Nick Sirianni and Howie Roseman have done during the season, right? With all of that coaching debacle that they had, specifically Nick Sirianni more than Roseman. But landing Fangio to me is a big win for them. And I got to respect Sirianni being okay with it because Sirianni is going to be in the hot seat next year. And if Fangio wants to, he could very well take over if things go south in 2024 for Sirianni. If the offense does not pick up and the defense does, Fangio could be your in-house leading candidate to land the head coaching job. So I'm going to respect Sirianni's decision to have Fangio join the team as defensive coordinator. Now, he is no stranger to Philly. One of the things that I love that Philly did, and my objective self loved it, was before Super Bowl 57, when the Eagles were going to play the Kansas City Chiefs, they actually had Fanjo join the staff as a consultant. And that was awesome to see. like being willing to bring up an outsider, to bring in an outsider who wasn't really coaching at that point, and to have him pitch in ideas as to how to stop Patrick Mahomes, like that's something that you gotta respect of a franchise. Like that's the kind of thing that we have said. You know what? Gotta love how the Eagles are doing things, right? So he's no stranger to Philly right now. I think it's a big get for them. And if we talk about Dak Prescott specifically, people like to say that he is a coach that has Dak Prescott figured out, a coach that can be Prescott's weakness or nemesis. I like nemesis more than weakness because the sample size, you know what? It is small. I'm also thinking of the Broncos game in 2021, just like you. It was 30-16 beating that the Cowboys just were able to score 16 points in the fourth quarter, but otherwise it was a shutout through 3 quarters. Prescott had a 52 or 54 passer rating by halftime in that game. And then there was a 2023 Cowboys game versus the Dolphins, which was not entirely great for Dallas. Sure, Prescott had 2 heroic MVP-esque type drives at the end of that one, but we also saw a lot of hesitation from Prescott when he was dropping back in the pocket and about to throw the football, but then he hesitated because he wasn't really trusting what he was seeing, because Fanjo just does that to you. Fanjo does a lot of disguising, a lot of rotation at the snap, a lot of gotcha type of situations during the game, and he's great at all that. And so I do think that it's not great that you're going to have to face Vic Fangio twice a year versus Philly, the team that you're fighting over for the division. And again, I don't want to cross that bridge and say he's Prescott's kryptonite and Prescott will never be able to beat a Big Fangio because the sample size has been small. But I do believe it's a problem. It is a problem to have Big Fangio in the division. I'm just being fair right now. I'm just being fair. And I think it makes sense. Listen, we made a big deal out of Jaylen Ramsey not shadowing CeeDee Lamb when the Cowboys played the Dolphins in Week 16. And I like how Mike McDaniel explained it. And I have the quote for you right here after the game. This was after the fact. CeeDee went off. CeeDee went off against Miami in the first couple of drives. Then the Cowboys stopped targeting him for some reason. They didn't change anything in the coverage. It was just a bad coaching decision for Dallas. But still, McDaniel offered an explanation as to why they didn't have Jaylen shadowing CeeDee, and I liked it. He says, one of the strengths of our defensive system is that at the snap, the quarterback has very minimal intel as to what's about to happen. The reason for that is that they're going to line up the same way every time. 2 high safeties. Even if it's cover 1, they're going to show you 2 high safeties. They're just going to rotate at the last minute. Now, a lot of teams do this, but maybe not at the rate that Big Fangio likes to do it. And they can do all of this crazy movement after the snap. One of the interceptions that the Cowboys had versus the Broncos in 2021. I know I'm going very far back, but the interception that the Broncos had on Dak in that game was a cover 1 changeup where they had been rotating to cover 1 consistently throughout the game, and then they had like this cover 1 robber when one of the safeties would take an underneath zone. I don't remember the exact details of it, but instead of rotating into a zone, like one of the safeties actually is trying to cut underneath the route of the receiver, and he gets that pick. I remember that explanation from The Athletic, from Ted Guyan when it happened. And that's the kind of stuff that I'm talking about here with Big Fangio. And I do think that type of stuff, it makes sense that it can slow down Prescott's performances because Prescott's biggest asset is his mental processing and his understanding of defenses, what they're trying to do. Dak Prescott does not have an elite arm like Patrick Mahomes does or Josh Allen does. He's a good scrambler, but he's also not Lamar Jackson scrambling, or he doesn't turn off on the Jets like Lamar does or Josh Allen does, who is a very physical runner. He can do it and all that, but he doesn't win that way. He doesn't win because of the arm. I would argue he doesn't even win because of the accuracy. I'm not saying he's inaccurate. I'm just saying that's not like his big thing. Heck, pocket presence, it's pretty solid. It's pretty good, but it's not at the level of Joe Burrow, for example, right? Dak wins because of his mental processing. So if you go up against a coach who is great at taking away things for you to process, that's the problem. Not saying he can't beat that. I'm saying there's a theoretical reason why it makes sense that a big Fanjo is able to beat Dak Prescott on the field. Sure, you can beat me because you can process all that I'm showing you, but what if I show you the same picture again and again and again, and it always changes? It always changes. It always changes once you snap the football. I think that's important. I think that is important to keep in mind. So people say Big Fangio has Dak figured out. Some people say that, hey, he hasn't. Well, these two will have chances to figure it out and to be proven correct or wrong, to test that hypothesis, because they're going to be facing each other twice a year. And I think that's actually exciting news. It's exciting news. Let's see what you guys have to say here in the chat. Let's see. Oh man, the Mo on the TV. Shout out to Double R who is watching the show. TC915 says Prescott is the Eagles' kryptonite, so some things gotta give. Yeah, man, Dak has been great against the Eagles' defense. He has been. Mitesh says depends on who they draft on defense for Fanjo. They need some better cornerbacks, and that is true. Mark Aaron, by the way, he says, hey, the Packers fired Joe Barry just like we expected, and it sucks to think that, hey, we talked about how bad that defense was. We talked about Joe Barry likely being fired. Dallas still didn't show up. Shout out to Gregory, who's reminding people to hit the like button and share the content. Hey, thank you for that, Gregory. And also thank you to all of you who are tuning into the show and hitting the like button for me and sharing. Now, one caveat with the whole Big Fanjo conversation. Remember what I just said about him being out and Miami allowing him to leave because he has his family in Pennsylvania? I'm not entirely sure that is like the real reason why Big Fanjo is out in Miami. Because how about this report from Sports Illustrated? I'll get it to you and I will read it to you very quickly. But first, I want to say this. Cam Smith, second-round rookie for the Dolphins, as soon as the news broke, tweeted out an emoji of an unlocked lock, right? So kind of like, I'm free, right? I'm free. Javon Holland posted a video kicking rocks. Like literally, he has rocks in his hands, tosses them up in the air, and he kicks them, kicking rocks. So a little bit of celebration there from Miami Dolphins players after the Big Fanjo news broke. And then there was this from Sports Illustrated. According to team sources, Fanjo's performance was a major topic of discussion in Coach Mike McDaniel's exit interviews. And there were, buckle up, and there were a number of the team's top performers who either wanted Fanjo to change his ways or be replaced, and flat out told McDaniel this. So it might not be all, every rose has its thorn, right? But it might not all be pretty for Big Fanjo and his coaching regimes. It sounds like the Dolphins players were not happy with Big Fanjo. So we'll see. We'll see how it all goes. There's obviously the Holland, the Cam Smith tweets, but there's also Jaylen Ramsey being upset at him not getting the chance to shadow City, for example. I remember talking about this when it happened, but on Friday of that game, of that weekend, Ramsey let it be known to reporters that he was not going to be shadowing CeeDee Lamb. And sometimes we make fun of how generic the responses from these players can be. And sometimes we make fun of like how players, if somebody asks Jaylen Ramsey, for example, 8 times out of 10, maybe he would have responded I will, maybe not Jaylen Ramsey. Jaylen Ramsey is not a good example for this. But a lot of cornerbacks would be like, hey, I will do what they ask me to. I will be a team player, whatever is best for the squad, whatever is best for the unit, whatever they need me, that kind of stuff. When reporters asked Jaylen Ramsey if he was going to shadow number 88 for the Cowboys, he was like, nope, that's not my role on this defense. I don't make that call. But no, I'm not going to. Basically, that's what he said. So clearly some discontent with Big Fanjo in Miami. So we'll see how that plays out in Philly. But for now, do expect Big Fanjo to become the Eagles defensive coordinator and for the Cowboys to face him twice a year moving forward as both franchises battle it out for the NFC East. Ladies and gentlemen, with all that being said, this show went on pretty quickly for me. 40 minutes already. Wow. I feel like I just started it. But that's it for tonight, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much for tuning into ADC Sports Dallas Primetime. As always, thank you for choosing to listen to the show. Do me a favor, and if you enjoyed it, hit the thumbs up button for me. It takes about half a second, and it helps me put this show in front of more and more Cowboys fans. I'll see you tomorrow night. Got a big show tomorrow night, and I hope you have a great Wednesday night. Thanks so much to everyone in the chat, and I'll see you tomorrow. Bye-bye.